Don Miller in 1958. And Jerry Shannon was a new teacher at McKinley School that year. Don Miller was our speech therapist and went from classroom to classroom and got the little ones that needed help with speech therapy. I taught 3rd grade, Jerry taught 5th, and I probably have known Don the longest of anyone present tonight. It's a long friendship, and we still miss Don and Elsie in our lives. We were their attendants at the wedding, and I was staying at our table. It was not a smooth courtship. Elsie was very content as a single 1st grade teacher and was very devoted to her classroom activities, and she didn't really know if she had room in her life for Don, but he was very persuasive, and I think they had a wonderful marriage. So, farewell, Don. We miss you. We love you. We're glad you're in our lives.
My name is Jerry Shannon, and my wife Lee, and we all met at McKinley School because I met my wife at McKinley School too. Lee came to teach kindergarten, and I was teaching 5th grade, and Don and Elsie got married a few years before we did, and so we did things with Don and Elsie, through our whole 60 years or 50 years. We did a lot of hiking with Don and Elsie. We did a lot of birding with Don and Elsie. We actually snowshoed in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan with Don and Elsie and stayed at Gunflint Lodge in the wintertime and did snowshoeing. And then there was 2 other couples besides Don and Elsie that would get together and hike once a month. And in order to nail down the dates for these hikes, at New Year's Eve, we'd always have a New Year's Eve party, and one of the couples would host the dinner for the New Year's Eve party, and then we would go for a hike prior to the dinner. But at the dinner, everybody brought their calendar for the new year, and we had plot out 12 hiking dates for the full year in order to not to have a conflict. And so we enjoyed both Don and Elsie, and matter of fact, our property in Highland Park is much like this piece of property, because after Don and Elsie bought this place, we bought our house in 1967. It was over 2 years of looking for a property that would kind of look like this, because we wanted a deep lot, we wanted to get into gardening, and we looked at over 40 different properties in Minneapolis and St. Paul, and found one in Highland Park that matched what this kind of looks like, because it's very deep. And so we miss both Elsie and Don, and glad we had their acquaintance for all our lives. And Betty Dean is the other person that was part of the 3 couples that did hiking every month. There's only 3 of us left out of the 6, and so she couldn't be here tonight because she had a conflict. But we enjoyed knowing Don and being with them all these years.
Say your name. Say your name.
My name is Maddie, and Don came to my brother and Greta's birthday.
Last year.
Last year, and he really enjoyed Molly, and so.
Who's Molly?
This.
Your dog?
Yes. I don't know, but it was a long time. The end.
I need the mic because I'm pretty loud to start out with. So all of you, I've met most of you now. My name is Bob Nierengarten, and you're saying, who is this guy? And how is he related to Don Miller? Nierengarten Miller makes no sense. So the first story I'll tell is Don is actually his mom and my dad's mom are sisters. So when Don's mom married, Don was already born and his dad, his stepdad, adopted him. That's how Don Nierengarten became Don Miller. So that's the connection. So if anyone wonders why there's a Nierengarten instead of a Miller, you know that Don used to be a Nierengarten. A couple things I want to mention before I get started. In the corner of this room, there are all the pictures that were on the refrigerator, on the wall, on another wall, in Don's house. Please, if any of them are of your family and you'd like to have them, feel free to take them. I took them down and wanted to make sure that if anyone wants their pictures, you're welcome to them. Second, thanking Blake, Zib, Cindy, Kathy, Christine, and anyone else that I'm forgetting, which I know I am, for helping putting this together. I don't know what you guys think, but it's pretty cool that this many people show up 3 months after Don died to celebrate Don's life. He's a special guy, and he's a special person to me, and thank you all for coming. I appreciate it. Now I have a couple of stories that I'll tell. My first story is as a young 7 or 8 year old kid. I came down here every summer and spent a week with Don and Elsie. Got to stay in the room where Don slept. That corner room I always thought it was a really girly room. There was 2 twin beds, and it was a little too girly for me, but that's where I was. Well, one of the first years, and I probably was 7 or 8, I came home and told my parents, Don and Elsie are the most cultured people I have ever met. You know, when I grew up in St. Joe, up by St. Cloud, small little town, and my dad said, "How is that possible?" And he goes, "Dad, you know what I had this week to eat there? They have vanilla ice cream that's imported from New York." They had New York vanilla ice cream. They are so classy that they get their ice cream sent in from New York. Him and my mom laughed really a lot right then. Didn't really get it till later that was just New York vanilla ice cream, but it was kind of a big deal at the time. As life progressed, obviously Don and we enjoyed having, my family would vouch for this, our conversations about politics. Don was pretty Democratic, as you'd all know. And I wanted him to think I was pretty Republican, and it was always fun to poke because we get into some good discussions, and we had a lot of fun talking just in general about politics, and he was very outspoken, so it was fun to have those conversations. The other thing I wanted to tell everybody about was Don's last days, because I know I've had a lot of questions. What happened? Don had a couple of episodes where he fell in his house. One of those episodes, he fell like multiple times and ended up at the University of Minnesota Hospital. After that, he was pretty weak, and he went to the Episcopal home and spent about a month there recuperating and was really doing good. And came home. Not 7 days later, I came here, found him in a real weakened state. We took him to the hospital, and he had pneumonia. And he was there for a couple of days, and again, my family can vouch for this. We were in the hospital room with him, and everyone says they have this moment of clarity. Literally, the Wednesday night before he died was the best I've seen Don in a year. I mean, he talked about everything. He was right at spot on. And we had a great conversation. It was a nice visit. And about 4 o'clock the next day, the hospital called and said that it went bad. So, went back to the hospital, made some of the hardest decisions I've ever made in my life. But, you know, Don had made it really clear in my time with him what he wanted and where he wanted to be. He wanted to be with Elsie. So, you know, we made some decisions together, and I made a few for him. And at 6:30 in the morning, sorry, it's so hard. My daughter showed up. I had been with him all night. I'm convinced he waited for her to get there. And he went from being the same he was all night to started and go. And literally 10 seconds before he left, he looked at me and had this almost smirk on his face, but I'll say it's a smile. And I'm convinced what that was him and I had a discussion that this last time in the hospital, he had to go to a nursing home because he just couldn't be alone. And I think that smirk was saying, I'm not going to the nursing home. So I'm convinced that's what he was doing. And I know that Blake had called me the night before and said, at that moment, it'll be one of the most peaceful things you ever see. And it was. So, all of you should know he didn't die alone. Died with people who loved him, with him. And then the last thing, all of you know that Don was, after Elsie died, Don, many people here got things from Don. He documented them all in a book. Take my word for it. So if any of you think you didn't get it, he's got a date and when he gave it to you. So anyway, this book has everything in it. So when I started going through the house, so all of you know, had lawn chairs for furniture. He had given most of his possessions away to many people here, and he was very proud of that. But the back page of that has a message to Elsie. I'm not sure I can read it, so I'm going to ask Erica to come up here and read it for me, because I don't think I can get through it. I don't know, but I'm hoping you can.
It says, "Dear Elsie, you will forever remain in my heart, forever in my thoughts, and forever in the farthest reaches of my soul. Your loving husband, Don."
Thanks. All I can say is, again, thank you all for coming. The last story I'll tell is I always threatened Don, because Don grew up Catholic. I threatened him with a huge funeral, with a big wake, with a big headstone with Miller in Lakeview Cemetery, and he told me that he would haunt me for the rest of my life. So, Don, I didn't do it. Thank you all for coming.
Much for helping me. I appreciate it.
Who are you? Who are you?
Oh, I'm going to announce
Okay,
my
good.
name.
Good.
Yeah, I'm John Swanson, and I've been friends with Don and Elsie since the early 60s. In fact, I met them in 1964 when my family and I were visiting up here. And in the years that I've lived next door, Don and I were best friends, really, and we felt we had much in common. And I should add that Elsie and Don were pioneers in several of the environmental conservation movements here in Minnesota and around the nation. And they were particularly keen on the preservation, if you will, of plant life. And they helped to start the Nature Conservancy here in Minnesota. And they were very enthused as to the progress of that organization, attempting to save bits and pieces of what little is left of Minnesota. And with this in mind, I believe that we should consider that Don and Elsie then were, by and large, pioneers in the environmental movement. Thank you for listening.
Hi, I'm Pam, and I live in the house right there. I'm going to read something I wrote, and then something that my son sent to read, and I'll try to get through the whole thing too. I wrote Don and Elsie. At first it was Don and Elsie, always together, always a pair, hiking with friends, traveling to parks and gardens, in the yard, planting, thinning, moving plants, nourishing soil, burying a baby pool to create a bog right over there, gathering oak leaves, black gold, grinding, spreading, removing, and spreading again. Sages of the garden, sharing their plants and plant knowledge, teaching children in a school and then teaching children in their yard. Refrigerator covered with annual pictures of children through the years. Feeding Alex and Nickel breakfast before sending them off to school. Raisins for Halloween, ginger cookies for Christmas. Both always interested in what you had to say. Both foundations of the community. Then just Don. Hardest for Don, but everyone missed Elsie too. Don tried to carry on, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. Grandpa, or Gampa to many. On good days, always up for a celebration, program, concert, museum, holiday, or sporting event. Don loved chatting with friends. Conversation topics with Don, the neighborhood, natural organic foods, the world's obsession with TV, computer, and cell phones, politics, environmental issues, wildlife, and plants. Every conversation, meal, visit ended with a hug and terms of endearment. Don also loved food. Everything was always delicious and so appreciated. Every meal needed a dessert, fruit crisp, ice cream, or chocolate, or all three. Near the end, seeing Don less, but when well enough, traveling with his cane, sharing conversation with those he met, tall and lanky, sweet and kind, sensitive and sad. Buona notte, auf Wiedersehen, old friend, you are missed. And this one is from my son Nick, who lives in Georgia now. Hi everyone, I wish I could be there tonight, but I no longer live in wonderful Minnesota. Don was such a major part of my life, it's hard to come up with the right words to express my feelings about him. I left and returned home many times, and he was always there, working in his garden, asking me about school or work, coming by for holiday gatherings with his honest smile and easy laugh. When his wife passed, I wrote a poem for her service, which led Don to dubbing me the Poet Laureate of Longfellow neighborhood. It was a title I took pride in. My life has changed much since then, and I don't write poetry anymore, but when I thought of what I wanted to say at Don's memorial service, poetry came to mind. I chose the following poem by Mary Elizabeth Fry because when I think of Don, I think of nature and the simple wonder of the world around us. I believe he is now a much greater part of that world. So this is the poem. Do not stand at my grave and weep. I'm not there, I do not sleep. I'm 1,000 winds that blow. I'm the diamond glints on snow. I am the sun on ripened grain. I am the gentle autumn rain. When you awaken in the morning's hush, I am the swift, uplifting rush of quiet birds in circling flight. I am the soft starshine at night. Do not stand at my grave and cry. I'm not there. I did not die. I miss you, Don. Love, Nick.
My name is Erica Walker, and my husband Don and my son Stephen and I used to live right around the corner. And I wrote a little something. I'm not going to read all of it because it's too long. I'm just going to read a couple snippets. I also volunteered to assemble anything else that anyone wrote. So I haven't done that yet. Not too many people have responded, but if anyone else wants to respond in writing, you can email it to me. It's on the same email chain as with Blake and with Bob. And so I'm glad to just assemble those together in a simple way and pass them around so everyone has a little something extra to remember Don by. So I'll just read a short thing. I met Don Miller's car before I met him. In the spring of 1995, my husband Don and I bought our house from Larry Lilja just across the Oval, and in August we moved in. Shortly afterwards, I noticed Don Miller's car parked over here in this driveway. The bumper was barely visible under the overlapping pro-environmental stickers. The Sierra Club, the National Wildlife Federation, the Audubon Society, and the others vied for the scarce real estate. Feeling a strong resonance with my own values mirrored on his vehicle, I remember thinking, I need to meet the person who owns that car. So shortly thereafter, I had pulled up out in front, and Don showed up, and he introduced himself to me. I didn't quite make the connection that he was the person who owned the car. And I don't remember in that conversation if I said something about the fact that our bushes needed to be trimmed or not, but they did, because we'd just recently moved, and the yard was really overgrown. So a couple days later, there was this knock on the door, and Don was standing out there in his wellies with his lopper in his hand, and Elsie was standing right beside him, and he had come to trim the bushes. And he also brought a mimeographed or a photocopied handout on how to trim bushes, because he knew, somehow he sensed that I had no clue about running a yard. So that was really my first introduction to Don and Elsie, and of course we had many, many wonderful years of friendship. So there was his great booming laughter. He took much joy in life and shared that so generously with others. How I loved hearing it throughout the neighborhood, knowing that he was out visiting and making friends. He knitted our neighborhood together with these threads of friendship. Like a busy bee, he flew from house to house, pollinating with kindness and care, making time to be a friend. Everyone needs a reason to get up in the morning, he always said, and for Don, this reason was always helping others. For years, he drove us back and forth to the airport when he needed a ride. He would stay with Stephen. If I was taking an evening class, he would stay with feed our cats when we were away. And often when we came home, there'd be little presents that he had left behind. He would leave little bags of cookies for Stephen under his pillow. Once he left a little Santa candle in our window. Anytime he came for dinner, he always brought some kind of contribution, a little cake or a little pie or something. One thing I loved about Don also is that he did not suffer fools, and he brooked no nonsense. And one time I gave him a handmade card, and I made some comment like, well, I know this isn't very good. And he kind of looked me in the eye, and he sort of scowled at me, and he said something to the effect of, well, if you're not really happy about it, then get better. You know? So I was like, okay. And another time when I turned 50, I was complaining about being so old. And he was roughly 80 at that time. And he turned to me and he said, Erica, I would give anything to be 50 again. And so, again, it was sort of point well taken. As you know, Don loved music, and he loved to read, and I often passed my New Yorker magazines on to him. And a lot of times when I did, I would have not had time to read a lot of the magazine myself because I was too busy. And so Don would often return them to me with the articles annotated and underlined. With comments, and then he'd want to talk to me about them and about why I hadn't read the article, because it was really a very good article. Oh, okay. The ones we didn't get back were on our door. Okay. And as people have said, Don loved to eat, and we shared many meals together. And oftentimes when I'd press him to have another helping, he would quote his grandmother saying, "I'm tight as a tick." Or I'm sure you heard him say this, I've had a sufficiency, more it would be a superabundancy. So we all know that. Wait. A superfluous abundancy. I knew I didn't quite have that right. Don was a role model to me in many ways, and among those were the ways he exercised and kept a good diet and that sort of thing. And I remember one time, it had snowed, and my husband Don and I and Stephen got up early, and we were just out having fun, and we were shoveling. We shoveled our sidewalk, and we shoveled Blake's sidewalk, and we were shoveling all the neighbors' sidewalks. And then we said, let's go shovel Don's sidewalk. So we were out there shoveling snow, and he opens the door, and it's like, what are you doing? And we're like, hey, we're shoveling your sidewalk. And he goes, well, I'm not dead yet. So it's like, okay, Don. Sometimes, as you know, Don could be very stubborn. And one day, one day, after a particularly bad thunderstorm the night before, he made some comment to me that he'd been out riding his bicycle in the thunderstorm and in the dark and gotten caught and had a hard time getting home again. And I scolded him, and I said, Don, I wish you'd stop riding that bicycle, and especially, don't ride it at night. And if it's going to rain, you're going to fall, you're going to break a hip, you're going to end up in a nursing home, so forth and so on. And he always said to me, Erica, living can be hazardous to your health. And I think that was such a great motto. And I've said that to myself a lot. Living can be hazardous to your health. So, of course, we all miss Don, and we always will miss Don. And I feel that I'm still really adjusting to the fact that he's gone, and I'm still pondering ways to honor him and ways to keep his memory alive. And one thing I would like to try to do in a small way is to try to follow in his footsteps and be the kind of person that Don was, the ready friend, the glue in the neighborhood. And as many of you know, we left Minneapolis in July of 2008 and moved to Denver, which is my hometown. And in general, it's been a good move for us, but it's often been lonely and it's been hard to make new friends. And we live in a neighborhood that has a lot of young families and a lot of young children. And so, we're just much older than a lot of our neighborhoods. Our child is much older. And so it's been easy for me at times to just feel lonely and then kind of say, well, I guess I'm just not going to make friends here because, these people are different than I am and their kids are different ages and so forth. And then I think about Don. What would Don Miller do? I ask myself. And then I know what I need to do and whom I want to be like. I need to walk outside and look for a way to be a good neighbor. So, thank you, Don.
I'm going to record you, though. What's your name?
Jim Lund. I live at the other end of the block here, and I moved to this block 50 years ago. And Don and Elsie came about 2 years later. And I've been friends with Don ever since. But our friendship was one of we could give it to each other.
I can hear you two arguing at our
house. Yeah, but Don was a special friend. When my wife died in 1979, and she left me with 3 children, one in college, one in high school, and one in grade school. But Elsie and Don were right there, and they were always supportive. My wife and Elsie went to Miss Woods. Do you know what that is? It's an elementary training school. Now, she was quite a bit older than my wife, but they would get together in December to go to a get-together for graduates of that fine school. But all I can say is that when I see how nice all you people are, and you say all these nice things, Don and I agreed philosophically on just about everything, but we could really tangle. There wasn't a time we got together that we didn't get a jab in at each other. When Elsie died, though, Don changed a little bit, or a lot, just like I did when my wife died. He was a good farmer back here. I used to tease him all about that. The animals had a right to all that food. They were here first. And we'd argue about that. I said, dig a hole under your fence or come over the top. The animals were all here. And we'd go round and round on things of that nature. When Elsie died, my dog and I, he used to sleep late then. When she was alive, the house was cool in the summer and warm in the winter. I used to get on his case because he'd be sitting in there when it was 95. I said, you got an air conditioner. He didn't pay any attention to me. And in the wintertime, I'd come back, you're going to die of hypothermia. And he didn't pay any attention to me then either. His house was down in the 60s. But I would try to see him at least once a week and sometimes more. My dog and I would wake him up in the morning. When Elsie died, he decided no more garden. He quit the same day. He told me anyway. And he slept late. He slept at least till 10 o'clock. And my dog and I would go up the steps and bang on the mailbox. You ever seen his mailbox in the front? Well, you can hammer at it. And I'd yell in, it's time to get up, Don. And he would come to the door, and he would invite my Norwegian Elkhound and I in. And we'd sit there and talk about, I don't want to make this too long, but Don, too, would get on his bike. That was his favorite. He was riding his bike into his 80s. Now, I just turned 80, and I wish I was in as good condition as he was when he was 80. He was riding over to the other side of the city. He was really, really something. But he and I like to listen to the public radio every day. And he would call me on the phone. Jim, do you have your radio tuned to 91.1? And I'd say, no, not right now, Don. He says, well, you should be. They're talking about something that we were just talking about the other day. And philosophically, the two of us were very close. I taught over in St. Paul for 40 years, 33 years at Highland Park Senior High. Now, during that time, Don, as a speech teacher, taught there too for a short time. But he moved around from school to school. By the way, teaching is the best job there ever was. I wouldn't recommend it to my worst enemy today. I'll tell you, I went to the doctor today, and she wanted to know why. And I said, if you were a surgeon, she says, I'm not. But how would you like the hospital administrator not only telling you what scalpel to use, but how to use it? And I said, that's exactly the way schools are run today. But it is one of the best jobs there ever was. I love it, and I miss it. One thing about Don you may not know, I don't think he taught 40 years like I did, but he was carrying out groceries at Lund's. Did you know that? He needed some extra Social Security points. And so he wasn't too embarrassed or anything. He went over and worked at Lund's carrying out somebody. I see some heads going up and down, so you know that. He was quite a fellow. But I remember just one last thing. Don and I were out here. We were giving each other a nut. And one of you, I don't know which came up, and you looked at it like, how can you talk to each other like that? Well, we could because we loved each other. He was a great... I'm going to miss... You notice the world grows smaller when your friends die? They really do. Anybody know who Martha Mason is up here?
Yeah.
Well, I've known her for about almost 60 years when she died. My in-laws lived right next door, and my wife, she grew up there. I grew up northeast Minneapolis, so. But that's enough. What?
That's a good beer.
Yes, it is. Well, thank you so much, so anyway.
Thank you.
Learning to grow vegetables from him and Elsie probably my whole life. And now, for the past 7 years, I've had their land to do it on. So, endless lessons and endless love. And that's all.
My name is Ann Morris, and I live here with my husband Dan. And we've been here 25 years. And Don and Elsie were the best neighbors anybody could ask for. And when our two sons were growing up at Minnehaha Academy, Dan and I were both working at the time. If one of them got sick, Don and Elsie would go to school and get our kids and bring them back to their house here and take care of them. Don would run back and forth, even in his pajamas sometimes, to our house, and I'd come over in my robe to his house. There were some real dark times for Don, and we got through it. And after Elsie died, it was a really hard time for Don, and he would be sitting in our sunroom at night, and sometimes I'd be there alone, and I'd see this shadow kind of moving by the window, and it was Don looking in to see if we were home. And so we'd go out and we'd talk on the deck or come over on Don's porch too. He was just a great, great friend, part of our family always. And our sons learned some really good lessons from Don and Elsie. And we were just truly, truly blessed by both of them. But with our houses lining up here too, I worked at home and my office is in the front of the house. And so Don and I would look through our living room windows and office window and wave at each other in the morning to just say hello, good morning. And at night, I'd go upstairs to one of the bedrooms and look down at Don at his desk, always reading, always writing, to just know that he was okay for that day too and that he was doing all right. So just with our windows lining up all the time, we were always kind of just checking across the yard at each other. So we miss them terribly, both Don and Elsie, but truly they've left a huge mark on our lives, and we just think of them a lot. So thank you.
Say who you are. Nice and loud.
I'm Arna Christensen, and when Don came over to our house, one time I read him a Captain Underpants book, and he hated it because He's like, why does even a writer make these kind of books? He's like, there are so many misspelled words and things. And he'd always sing this one song. It was like, why won't you behave? Why won't you behave?
That's it. How does the rest of it go? Does anybody remember? Why won't you behave? Why won't you behave? And then there's some other part.
Why don't you? I forgot.
You don't remember. Sam, you remember? Anything else? Not that much.
I'm Kathy Kreitzer, and I just live down the street. And I'll just tell a couple ice cream stories because it seems like that's a theme tonight. Don was a great date, and he would come sometimes to a gig of Mark's with me, and he loved music, and he didn't like rock and roll, but any other kind of music he seemed to really appreciate. And one night he came to the Loring Pasta Bar with me, and Mark was sitting in with the cafe accordion, and it was a grand evening. There were lots of dancers. It was really fun, and then a whole Jewish wedding came in, and Don was just having the time of his life and saying how wonderful it was, and we were sitting, and then he thought it was time for dessert, and so they had the waitress come over, and he said, I'd like a little ice cream, and she said, we don't have ice cream. And so he looked at the dessert menu. There was nothing on it that he wanted, and so then he got up. I thought he was going to use the restroom. Pretty soon I looked over, and he was over in the kitchen. You know, they have that open kitchen so you could see it, and about 10 minutes later, the waitress came with a big bowl of ice cream for me and for Don. He said, I knew no good restaurant wouldn't have ice cream. And then another time, he went to a lecture with me just across the river, a Will Steger lecture. And it was dark winter, and he was not in the best of moods in the first place. And then I thought, why did I bring him to this Will Steger lecture where we're talking about doom and gloom? And so we got through the lecture and the panel discussion, and it was pretty sad about what is happening to our world. And so we were driving back across the river, and Don said, so if the ice all melts, what will happen to the polar bears? I said, well, you know, they probably won't be able to live anymore. And it was quiet for a little while, and we were almost across the bridge, and he said, say, would you like a Dairy Queen? So he was a great date, and I'm going to miss him a lot.
Well,
Who are you?
my name is Jay Nierengarten. I'm Bob's son. No resemblance, you really can't see it between us. But anyway, so the last couple of years I've gotten to know Don quite a bit more because I was the designated go to the dentist with him kind of person because I live so close to him. So he would always afterwards say, hey, do you want to go out for lunch or something? And I was like, well, being a college student, a free meal is always a good thing. So I would take him somewhere. And he would order the biggest thing on the menu. Like, it was unbelievable how big his order would come out. And the guy, if you gave him enough time, he would finish the whole thing. I don't know where he put it. Probably his hollow leg or something. But I would say that was, even at Thanksgiving, he'd get just a bigger plate than me. And I'm a big kid, so it was surprising. And he'd put it down pretty good. So that was my biggest thing is how, if you gave him enough time, he'd get anything done. So that was my favorite story about Don.
Hello, I'm Kate Brady, and I live almost straight over there with my family, Amy, Jesse, and Dave. And Don was always there for us with our pets. And in about 2000, maybe it was 1998, my daughter Jessie got a little gerbil, Snowball, white little furry thing. And Snowball had a short life. And Don heard that Snowball had gone to the other side, and he came over the day that we were burying Snowball and played taps for our family and for Snowball. And it was just so perfect. And then my very fondest memory of Don was in, I think it was about 2002, my daughter Amy got a lop-eared bunny. Brown, adorable, just like picture perfect bunny. And so, of course, she named him Bun Bun.
And she would take Bun Bun out to the garden in the summer, and Bun Bun was just in heaven running around eating the plants. But one day, Bun Bun got away, and Bun Bun at that time was maybe this big, and Amy just freaked. It was the same day that we had welcomed 2 boys from Korea to be our exchange students for a couple of weeks. So we all gathered and decided to run through the neighborhood and look for Bun Bun. Well, in the Korean language, the word B, the letter B, doesn't exist. So here are these 2 young boys from Korea running up and down the street, going into neighbors' bushes, going, Bun Bun, Bun Bun, where are you? And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I wonder if some neighbors think they're kind of spotting the house for a future break-in or something. But anyways, that's my devious personality here. But we saw Don along the way and told Don, and Don made it his personal mission to tell everybody in the neighborhood that Bun Bun was lost. And hours went by, we put up flyers, and Bun Bun wasn't coming home. And late that night, I thought, a dog got Bun Bun, he was hit, or maybe an eagle had a great dinner with Bun Bun. And so the kids were going to bed, and I hear this knock on the door. I open it up, and here is Don Miller holding Bun Bun. And it turns out he had talked to these 2 women who had seen this bunny running around, and they knew it was not a wild bunny. And so the 3 of them went running and picked up Bun Bun and brought him back to our house. And Bun Bun lived 12 years, and he passed away this summer. So thank you, Don. You're just a great fella.
I'm Jerry Grant. I live over in the next block. Don and I got to be the best of friends over many years, probably since the early 80s. But more so after Elsie died. So I was really touched by his modesty, his humbleness. He was kind of, I started inviting him over for dinner every so often after Elsie died, and we got into many discussions about many things, but his mood and his, I don't remember exactly how this went, but he didn't. I kind of pointed out how nice it was for him that he was being invited out to so many people's homes after Elsie died, and it had to do with he didn't seem to think he had many friends or something like that, or in the neighborhood. And I pointed out how many places he's getting invited out, and he says, well, those are all Elsie's friends. Yeah, eventually he didn't argue that point anymore. But I just look at all your people. I mean, this is. I was really touched by that, and he meant it. He really meant it. And another thing that was more amusing point after Elsie died, when he started giving possessions away. I mean, he gave so much away that he realized he gave too much away, and he had to go back and ask some of those people for things back. We shared literally hundreds of meals together. Every week or two he'd come for dinner. Sometimes he'd invite me out and my son too, and we did have a few arguments, but we also philosophically were on the same page. And another thing that impressed me was that he told me he and Elsie had been to every state park in Minnesota at least once. So I was pretty impressed with that. We had a lot of fun together. So I miss him very much. He was like a best friend at times, almost like a dad. At other times, like a brother. Just great, and it was great for my son Julian also. So,
thanks. My name is Ken Anderson, and my wife and 2 kids and I were fortunate and blessed to be Don and Elsie's neighbors for 6 years before the Morses kicked us out. And both my dad and Sherry's dad passed away when they were young, and so Don was basically our kids' grandfather. And to this day, he is Papa Don to both my kids and all 3 of my grandkids. You could not ask for better neighbors. Many times our kids would be over here and they'd read stories to them and watch the kids, and it was to see the gardens that Elsie had was just amazing. The one thing my wife asked me if I was going to say, I used to like Twinkies. And after I got enough articles about how bad Twinkies were, I don't think I've had another Twinkie since.
I'm Ken's wife, Sherry, and it was 8 years we were here, honey, not 6. 6 in Illinois. But anyway, the same thing, I just appreciated so much the way they just loved our kids, gave them a real love of nature. And I remember they used to, Matt, when he was little, they used to have a afternoon every couple weeks where Matt would pack up his little bag with stuff and go over to their house when he was a preschooler, and they'd have an afternoon together with Don and Elsie. And then when Jenny was 9 months old, it was New Year's Eve, and she was very, very ill, and it was midnight, and her temperature was 106, and I said, okay, I can't take this anymore. We got to get her to the hospital. And Don and Elsie were coming home from their New Year's Eve party, and so we called him up and asked him if they would come and stay with Matthew while we took Jenny to the hospital until my mother could come from her New Year's Eve party. So just always so willing to give and to share, and to share their love for the world and nature, and they just were dear, dear people. And even though we moved far away to Lindstrom, Minnesota, we still come by when we were in the cities and stop and talk with Don and invite him to things, and just really will miss him too.
Hi, I'm Kari Bushnell, probably the newest member of all this crew. My husband Bill and I moved into what I like to call the Walker Weinshanker Hall. Because I know I've talked to a few people around the neighborhood, and Don was one of them that always said, would refer to a home as the original owners almost, that was the Olson's Homes, who now is the such and such. So, but I have a story I want to talk to you about Don, and I think it reflects on what Don's community here meant to him and how other people perceive that. And there was one day I came home from work. I'm a nurse at the university, and Dave and Kate, or Dave had come over to our house while I was gone at work, and said that Don had taken a fall and in the circle here, and had hit his head pretty bad. And Kate was off getting the glasses, reframed and done, and would I be able to come over when I was done and kind of assess him. And I work, just until recently, with people who have no teeth, but they are neonates. So I'm like, that whole world to me is completely foreign. And but I thought, I'll come over. You know, he's my neighbor. I care for him so deeply. And I came over, and he was sitting there, and he had a major goose egg on his head, and he seemed oriented, and he could talk, but he was pretty much, I think Dave could confirm this, and my husband was there too, he was refusing to go to the hospital. And we had already had a few times throughout the summer that some issues had come up that summer. So I, felt horrible. I didn't want to force the issue, but yet I said, well, I'm going to call your doctor's office, And it was like a Saturday. So I called the urgent care office for his doctor, and we just came up with the plan that how we were going to take care of Don. And I explained to her who I was, and I said, well, she said, ask me, is there people who will, come in and check on him and all this stuff? And, between the four of us, we all made this plan that we would come in, and then one of the last things she said is she's like, wow, this man has got to be the luckiest man around to have a community of people like that around him. And, sorry, I didn't know Don for very long, but I just feel really blessed because he always used to just talk so much about you guys and how I am so welcomed in this neighborhood, or my husband and I. And I feel that just from you guys right now, not just from me, but just the way you really, really care about him. And I think that's a tribute to you. Thanks.
I'm Dave Zametta. I'm Kari's neighbor, and the Dave she was just referring to there. My wife Kate Brady had just talked a bit ago about Bun Bun and our twin daughters Amy and Jessie and all. I just wanted to say one of the things that always impressed me about Don is that he was as stubborn as could be, and the story that Kari just told is one great example of it. He was German, like probably many of us in the crowd here. There's way more Germans here in Minnesota, people of German extraction, than any other origin. So I think he was very proud of that. But one of the things that Don was more than anything else was just incredibly generous and kind to animals, kind to the people around him, kind to his neighbors. And he epitomized the way we need to treat each other. He may have had strong opinions about things, he may have disagreed with people, but he was kind and generous to everybody around him. And I hope that can serve as an example for all of us. Thank you, Don, for the example you set for us about how to be a good neighbor.
Well, my name is Jenny Anderson. I grew up in that house for a very brief amount of time. In fact, I don't remember it, but I do remember my surrogate grandparents, Don and Elsie. So many fond memories. First of all, Don is, I've never met anyone like him. Who else could bring us all together like this? It's Don. The Jarashes used to live close by. I'm a little fuzzy on the details, but we would celebrate birthdays with Don and Elsie. Wonderful pictures of that. I'm not sure what time of year it would have been, but there was a certain time every year we would come over, my brother Matt and I, and with our parents. And Elsie would have had these gingerbread cookies with little raisins in them, and I don't even like raisins, but I absolutely love the cookies. And it was so thoughtful, and there was one for me and one for my brother. When she did pass, I remember coming over to the house and kind of walking through, looking for her, wondering where she had gone. I think it was hard for Don after she died. There was kind of a change about him. But some things didn't change. Don had the best laugh that I've ever heard. It was this roaring laugh. He was so easy to be around. I think about the bond that we had. I mean, really, we were just neighbors, but it morphed into something completely beyond that. I mean, he was like a grandpa, and we call him Papa Don, and the same for Elsie when she was alive. And he and Elsie were the only ones that called my brother Matthew, and that always stuck with me. And in fact, if I want to recall their voices, which is very comforting to me, I can hear them saying his name, and there's still a part of me. Don's generosity is just absolutely incredible. I was in college, definitely the poor college student, and I would receive some money in the mail, and he had the best handwriting too, in this day and age of texting, and that kind of has gone by the wayside, but it was, his handwriting. I hope this gives you a boost. And we love to go to the Science Museum together. We would go to parks together. I have so many fond memories of Don, and I will miss him very much.
Hi, my name's Susan Sullivan. This is our son Sam and my partner Michelle. And we have two other boys too, Will and Leo. And we've been friends with Don, I don't know, maybe 10 years or so, but we never met Elsie. So that was our loss. But Don often told us about a place up north on Burnside Lake, up near Ely, where he and Elsie used to go. And it was a place called Listening Point. And Sigurd Olson used to write, he wrote about Listening Point. And a couple summers ago, Michelle and I finally went to Listening Point. And then I came back and told Don about it, and he was so pleased that we went there. And I like to think of Don, and even though I didn't know Elsie, I like to think of Don and Elsie's heaven is Listening Point. And he shared that with us.
So I've known Don all my life, and the past couple years I've mowed and shoveled for him. And I could just talk for hours with him after mowing for him. He's always just had very interesting things to say and interesting perspective on life, and he's just a great guy. He's very generous. I remember often we'd look at our mailbox and there'd be organic food, organic cookies, dark chocolate in there, and then he's just a great guy. He'll be missed.
And I'm Michelle, and perhaps that's because Sam liked Twinkies. I think we need to talk about Don's timing. I think those of us in the neighborhood knew Don had impeccable timing. Dinner time, he showed up. And with three boys, those of you that are parents, you know that in general there'll be either 3 for 3 or at least 2 for 3 who do not like the meal. We loved it when Don showed up, because he's the one that always loved the meal. He would go on and put enormous amounts of salt on. Our kids would say, "Mom, look at the salt." I'm like, "Shh." And then I think I was talking to Bob earlier. I mean, one of us would have to stay at the table while Don finished his meal. He was a great guy. He was an incredible role model. And I only wish we had known Elsie.
Hi, this is Sarah Christensen. I'm a neighbor of Don's, and we had Don over for dinner quite a few times, and we would invite him over kind of last minute, but he would come over to our house every couple times a week. And one thing that I've really observed about Don, especially being in our house with 4 kids, it'd be totally loud and crazy, and our kids would be so comfortable with Don that they'd burp at the table and just be kind of crazy, and he'd come over and the house would be just a mess. But I never ever felt judged by Don in any way, and I think that's kind of a rarity. I was always comfortable having him here and never felt judged by him. We will miss him.
This is Signa Christensen, and when Don came over to eat dinner with us, he was really clever and funny and really nice. And there's a phrase he always said that's called tweet, tweet, and pleasant dreams.
This is Blake Christensen, and I just want to say thank you to everyone who came out on Friday the 21st, 2012. It was a magical night that was filled with so many wonderful stories about Don and Elsie and about how much they are loved by all of us. They will be missed very much.
Daddy! My name is Finn Christensen, and I just want to say that Don's a sweet man.
This is Don, wishing you a bit of tweet, tweet, and pleasant dreams.